Okay, so this is where we left off last week. We were working on this program that is going to read in a list of people from a file, and potentially this program could do a lot of interesting things with that list of people, but we're just going to stick with printing it right back out again in the console window, just to keep things simple. And we're working on learning about structs, but there's some other issues that are going to come up as we work on this, particularly with reading from input files in C++. And also there's going to be a lot of parameter passing going on, so it may be a good opportunity to review a little bit of that and make sure that you're really all up to speed with that. Everyone, any questions about what's going on here before we start? This is how far we've gotten in the program, not very far. We just set up the struct, created this array, and then set up our call to read data. Excuse me. So I think the next thing we'll need to do is write our read data function. Maybe I can just remind you what the file itself looks like. Here's the file that we're going to be reading in. We're going to have an ID number, oh, this is not the same one. Huh. Okay, so this file is interesting. I have two versions of this file. In this version, this character here stands for filing status, tax filing status. Okay, so it's either married, single, or head of household. H for head of household, M for married, S for single. So that will require us to change the struct slightly, but you can see that, so ID number, tax filing status, last name, first name, age, street, zip code. Okay, any questions about what we're doing here? So I guess I'll just change this to filing status. Okay. So let's work on read data. Feel free to jump in if you have any questions or if you think something's wrong or maybe missing. Always good to have stuff to talk about. Always good for me to hear questions or comments, just because it gives me a better idea of how everyone's doing with all of this. So for read data, the first thing that we need to do is talk about how we read from an input file in C++. So that is covered in lesson 5.5. Let me just ask, can anyone confirm, or whatever the opposite of confirm is, that this is where we left off? Maybe no one remembers any better than I do. That's okay. I just want to make sure I'm not repeating myself and everyone's sitting there going, why is he repeating himself? I just had this feeling like we've gotten further than this, but anyway, we'll start here. Input files, reading from input files is covered in lesson 5.5. It's also covered in the textbook in the chapter on loops, whatever chapter that is. I can look real quick. Chapter 5, imagine that, has a section on using files for data storage. And this is the first time we're actually using it in a lecture or in an assignment. So step one in the lesson, I have these steps that you have to go through to read from a file. It's one of those things that isn't conceptually real difficult, just lots of details. So the first step that I list in lesson 5.5 is include Let me put just step 1. Okay, you have to # include fstream because we're going to have to use some things that are defined in the fstream file. So that's step 1. Step 2 is declare a file variable, because we can't, in our C++ code, we can't refer to the file specifically by name. So we're going to create a file variable and then attach that variable to an actual file on our computer. So the type of the variable will be ifstream. I'm going to name it infile. So that's step 2. And then step 3 is going to be open the file variable, which means basically means connect it to an actual file that is on your file system. The way we do that is with the open function. Okay, and now I'm just going to say that normally we would combine these 2 steps into one. You can just sort of like when you declare and initialize an int variable on the same line, kind of the same thing going on here. This is declare and open at the same time. So in other words, this line is exactly equivalent of these 2 lines together up here. Okay. Oh, I didn't record. Oh, yeah, I did. No, jeez. Okay. So the step 4 then, and step 4 is not actually a requirement, I suppose, but it's really, really good practice. And that is, I want to check to see if that file opened correctly. If I don't do that, and then somehow there's a problem with opening the file, I may run my program and it may not work, and I may have no idea why it doesn't work. So doing a step 4 where you check to make sure that the file was opened correctly can be super helpful in terms of debugging if the file is not getting opened correctly. So what we're going to do is we're going to say if not in file. Okay, and that's a little bit of a strange syntax, but it turns out that this file variable, normally we use it for reading, to say where we are reading from. But in this case, a variable of type ifstream, it turns out, if it goes into an error state, its value becomes false if you just test its value. So that's a good way to just check and make sure that everything's okay with the file. If you try to open a file and the system cannot find the file, then that's going to put the file variable into an error state. And so that's what we're checking here. So if not in file, see out, couldn't open file. Else, let's do the rest of our code. Okay, so let's call that step 4, confirm file opening. Okay, now we are ready to actually start reading stuff from the file. Before we get into something really complex, which we're going to, in terms of being able to process that entire file, let me just show you really simply the way I would read. Say if I just wanted to read the first integer in the file, I could just say int I in file I. Okay, so this syntax should look very familiar. This is exactly the same way we would read an integer from the keyboard. We simply replace cin, which represents the keyboard, with infile, which represents the file that we are reading from. Okay, so same exact syntax that we've been using for this extraction operator since like day 2 of the class. Just put infile on the left side instead of cin. Any questions about that? Clear enough? So now I holds the file. No. So if this was cin, would you ask me if I now holds the keyboard? No, what happens there is one value of type int is read from whatever that left operand is, right? Okay, so if I say infile, if I go look at my file for a minute, what's going to happen there is I is going to get equal to 1, right? That makes sense to everyone? Okay. All right, but that's not what we want to do, right? We don't want to just read a single value from the file. We want to process the whole file. So what I'm going to show you is sort of a standard pattern for how to process an entire file. Strongly recommend that every time you sit down and you think, okay, I need to write some code to process this entire file, that you follow this pattern exactly. And if you can think back and remember special value type loops from lesson 4, that's basically what we're going to be doing here. If you remember the special value type loops, we've had the cout, cin above the loop, and then we have the cout, cin inside the loop at the bottom of the loop. We're going to be doing the same thing here, except it's not a cout, cin. It's just a read one item from the input file. So I'm going to say read one person, which that in itself is a lot of work, right? So I'm going to use my decomposition skills here, and instead of writing all of the code to read one person, I'm just going to say, let me put that off. I'll write that later. For now, I'm just going to call a function, read person. And we'll talk about what the argument needs to be. Okay. All right, after I've read a person, I'm going to check to see if that was successful. Okay, so this is the standard way of checking to see whether we have read past the end of the file. Same idea as what we have here. It's just something different that we're concerned might put it into the error state, right? If I try to read something from a file and there's nothing there to read, the file variable goes into an error state. And so we can check that as the condition in our while loop. Okay, as long as I successfully read a person, what I want to do is put that person into my array. Lots of question marks here, right? And then read the next person in the file. Okay, so I could call this step 5, read stuff from the file. And then just to finish up talking about the file stuff here, when you're done with a file, you need to close it. So that looks like this. So that's step 6. Okay. All right. Let's talk about these question marks here. What do I need to? Yeah, go for it.
So when you put in file dot close, do you have to put the name of the file in the parentheses?
No.
Okay,
It's just a close takes no arguments, because I already know what file it is because I'm using the file variable in file, right?
I see.
File guide question, is that
Sure.
just a tab for between your statements and your comments?
Yes,
Okay, thanks.
not necessarily that that's a good thing, just was the easiest thing for me to do at the moment. Just to clarify, since you asked that question, this is certainly not how I would actually want to document or comment my code, right? I'm just putting it there because it's a good way to teach you what's going on here. So anyway. Anything else before we keep going? Anyone want to say anything about what should go here in the read person argument? Do I even need an argument there? Okay, so, or let me ask you a different question. What's going to go there? I see the word yes, but I don't know what my question was. So if that's
I
important.
said
for me.
yes to needing an argument in read person,
Oh,
but
okay.
I'm not sure what.
Okay. Do you have an idea of why we need an argument?
So I think we are looking for last name, first name, and age, right? And even ID.
Okay, well, that's true, but we don't want to treat those things as separate entities. We just want to think of all of that as a person. So Joseph suggested that we would want to have read person return something of type famous person. That's correct, right? I'd be careful using the word return, because usually when we say that, we are referring to actually a return statement. And I don't think that's what we want. That's what we want this argument to be, right? So if I say, read person, temp person, and so read person, the function, the job of read person is going to be to read one person from the input file and put that information into this variable temp person. Does that make sense what's going on there? So I need to declare temp person. Anybody want to ask a question about that, or just say that you're lost or anything else? Hopefully that makes sense, right? I want to read a person. My function is called read person, and that function is going to read a person from the file and put it into this argument right here. Okay. I'm just going to tell you that there's one other thing that the read person function is going to need to know in order to do its job. It's also going to need to know the file to read from, right? Is that confusing? Is that clear? Does that make sense? I'm calling a function named read person, and I'm
That
telling
makes
it,
sense.
okay, I'm telling it which file to read from, and I'm giving it an argument that it can populate with whatever it is that it reads. Okay, and then it's going to be the same thing here. Okay. All right, and so then hopefully you can, someone maybe can tell me what I need to type there in the place of those question marks. Temp person, yes. Okay. All right, so now the only thing that's missing is we have to figure out what this index here is supposed to be. Any thoughts about that? So define an int and add to it each iteration. Right. We need a counter. So let's count. Count starts off at 0. Each time through the loop, we're going to put the person into person lists of count and then increment count. Right? Everyone clear on what's going on there? Any questions? I think we are pretty much done with this function. There's actually one little detail hanging out there that I'm sort of waiting to see if anybody catches. But don't worry, we'll eventually get to a point where if we haven't fixed it, it will become a problem and we'll have to fix it at that point. But we're pretty close there. So next job will be to write the read person function, right? So let's do that. So the infile parameter is of type ifstring. The way that ifstring variables work is when you use them as parameters, they are always passed by reference. So you have to always put an ampersand there. That's just the way that string variables work.
It's not automatically referenced then?
Correct. So it's kind of the opposite of an array, right? With an array, you never put ampersand because it's already automatically passed by a reference. With ifstring, you always have to put ampersand to make it pass by reference.
Got it.
Okay, so read person, pretty straightforward. We're just going to say infile readme.id, infile readme dot, what did I call it? Filing status. Infile readme dot last name. First name. Page. Zip code. All right, and that's it. Any questions about that function? Anybody see any potential problems here? I'll give you a hint. Anybody see any problems with the parameters? All right, we're going to go ahead and go with that. So if everything is working correctly, I should be done with my read data function now. This is a good time to use what I would call iterative development. That is not the right term. What term am I looking for? Not iterative. Oh well, anyway. Now would be a good time to stop and make sure that everything we've done so far is working correctly, because I could call my read data function, and then hopefully the entire array will be populated with all of those people from the file. And then I could just print out a couple of items just to check and see whether it seems to be working correctly or not. So I'm not going to write my whole print data function yet. I'm just going to do something like, say, cout. What if I wanted to print the last name of the first person? What would I say? The last name of the first person in the file. Someone give that a try. How do I say that?
Person list. Oh, never mind. It's being typed.
Oh, okay. All right, what do you guys think about that? What was typed in the chat? Does that look correct?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, so just to be clear for everybody, we have to start with person list, right? Because that's the name of the variable that this information is stored in. So that makes it clear that we need to start with person list. But then why couldn't we do this? Or can we? Is that correct, or is what's typed in the chat correct?
That one isn't correct.
That one is incorrect, is that what you said?
Yes.
Okay, that's true. Anybody want to take a shot at explaining why that's incorrect?
I can try, although I'm not sure if it's right.
Sure.
That's incorrect because first name isn't an array and person list is an array. So the square brackets and the 0 needs to be next to person list.
Right, so anytime there's a square brackets in C++, it's got to be next to an array, right? Or to put that another way, and actually probably the error message I would get if I were to try to compile this, it would say, wait a minute, there's a dot here. If there's a dot here, that means that the thing in front of the dot needs to be a struct, right? You can't put a dot after the name of an array. That doesn't make sense. So here's the correct version. Okay, so it's this hierarchical thing. You start with the whole array, and then you have to say which element of the array you want to access, and then you use the dot operator to say which part of that struct you want to access. Okay, so that should give me the first name of the first person in the list. Just for fun, you know, I might try person lists of 9 dot, what should I say, dot age, and just see what comes out. Okay, so we can test this now and see if our read data function is actually working before we start writing the print data function. So notice that the struct declaration is going to go above the prototypes because the prototypes actually use the struct, right? So the struct has to be declared first before I can put the prototype. Okay, so we give this a try. Oh, what happened? That's a great error to get, right? It tells you absolutely nothing about what's going on. And to be honest, I'm not sure. I mean, I'm aware of a couple of problems here, or at least one. I'm not sure why it would give us that particular error message. So I'm just going to go right to the error and we can talk about it. So we have a problem with this line right here, 64. Anybody see any problems with that? And this is something really super important. you should definitely have this dialed in by this point. I don't mean that to be mean. I'm just saying, you know, if this isn't dialed in at this point, you really need to focus on it and get it figured out, because it's going to haunt you. Yeah, right. We need an ampersand here. Because if it's passed by value, this is all nice and everything, but it's not actually changing anything back in the function that called it. So when I call read person here, temp person was declared here, has garbage in it. Nothing's changing when I call read person, so it's still got garbage in it. And so when I assign it into the array, I'm just putting garbage in the array. But if I put an ampersand there, then when I change this variable here, readme, inside read person, that is also changing the variable temp person back out here in the calling function. Anybody want me to talk more about that? Anybody want to ask a question about that? I'm hoping that for most of you, that was just a, oh yeah, duh, I should have realized that. If it's still sort of like, why is that exactly needed there? Then we need to get that figured out. You know, shoot me an email, talk to Kyle, whatever, but get that figured out. Let me go ahead and change that in the prototype. And I'm hoping that is what was causing that error, because I'm not seeing any other errors. Let's find out. Yep, oh, not good. What did we do here? Give me a couple minutes. Huh. I do not know what's going on with that. And as far as I can tell, that's exactly what I have in my notes. Line 24. I'm not seeing the problem with line 24.
So the struct is supposed to have a semicolon at the end of its bracket then?
Yes.
Okay.
In fact, that's actually an important point. If you leave that out, you're going to get a syntax error that's probably going to make no sense. So
What
make sure.
what about line 43?
That's commented out because we're doing it all on one line instead right here.
Okay.
Um,
You don't have the dot open, so you do not need to put dot open in order to open the file.
Right.
Then?
That's correct. This one statement right here takes the place of these two statements.
I see.
Huh.
Maybe it's the
So the problem turned out to be that I had more names in my file than I thought. So I just increased the size of the array up to 2000, and now everything seems to be working fine. Amadeus, the first name of the first person in the file, 34, the age of the 10th person in the file. Okay, could you do while count less than array size? You mean here? I assume I guess that's the only loop we have, so that must be what you mean. That's a good question. Could we? I guess I'll answer that and I'll say no. But someone tell me what would be the problem with that? Why can't I say while count less than array size.
Because the file may be the element in the file may be less than the array size.
Yeah, right. At some point, I'm gonna run out of people in the file. I want the loop to stop when I've reached the end of the file. I don't want to keep trying to read people after that, right? Does that make sense? So in this particular case, there's around 1,000 people in the file. Array size is 2,000. I don't want to be filling up my array with a bunch of garbage after that. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. And hopefully it makes sense that what I really want to say here is that keep going as long as there's more data in the file, right? Or let me say that one other way. How do I know when I want to stop reading? Has nothing to do with the size of the array. It just has to do with when I run out of stuff in the file to read, right? Okay. Although, so sorry, maybe I'm beating this to death a little bit too much, but I could see why you would go that direction, because then at least you would not try to read more names than you could put in the file, more names than you could put in the array. So in a sense, that would have prevented that. But then you'd have the opposite problem if there were fewer people in the file than there were elements in the array. Okay. So I think what we need to do now, we're done with reading, and I need to just work on my print data function. So let me uncomment that. So for print data, I'm going to need the person list, of course, because that's what it is that I want to print, right? And I'm going to do it up here at the top just so that I don't have to keep scrolling back up and down. Print data, famous person list. Okay, everyone okay with this so far? Any questions? The parameter for print data is an array of famous person. So for print data, I'm just going to have a for loop. And each time through the for loop, I'm just going to print one person. I'm going to call a function to do that. Okay. So the only thing I need to know now is what to put in the place of those question marks. Please, so think hard about this. What is it that needs to go there in the place of those question marks? Don't have to give me a final answer. If you just have some idea about conceptually what you think needs to go there, that would also be fine. No guesses, huh? Not even, so tell me, not in C++, but in length of person list. Depends on what you mean by the length of person list, right? You mean the 2000? Because that's not what we want, right? We don't want array size here, because that would mean even if there's only 3 people in the array, I'm going to be printing 2,000 people, right? The amount of people in the array, exactly. How am I going to get that there, though? Let me tell you, given what we have right now, there's no way to do that. So what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to have that be additional information. While loop instead, but while what? While we have index with famous person. I'm going to guess what you mean is while the index we're looking at actually contains a famous person in it. The problem with that is all 2000 elements of the array contain a famous person. It's just that some of them are garbage. Does that make sense? It's not like you can have an empty array element. Array elements always have something in them. And there's no way to tell whether it's an actual person or whether it's just garbage. There's no way for the computer to check that. So the only way to make this work, can we make count have larger scope? Well, we could do that, but we're going to try to avoid that so that we keep our functions self-contained and independent, right? So yeah, basically the point there is that what we want here is we want the count, from the read data function, right? But these are two completely separate functions. We don't want to have them be sharing a variable. What we want to do instead is we want to pass that information to the correct place. So I'm going to start from here, which is the place where I need that information. And I'm going to say, I'm not going to call it count here. I'm going to call it num people. Okay, because that's a more descriptive name, right? And so I'm going to add that to my parameter list. I'm going to say, in order to do my job, I'm function print data. In order to do my job, I'm going to have you tell me how many people there are. Otherwise, I can't do it. Okay. So as we've done many times now, we're going to just trace this back to make sure we've got all of the arguments and parameters set up correctly. So going back to where I call print data, that means when I call print data, I'm going to have to send it num people, right? But how is main going to know what num people is supposed to be equal to? Well, we're going to have to declare it. And then that information is actually determined in the read data function, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell read data, when I call read data, I'm going to say, you need to tell me how many people there were. So I'm going to add that as another argument in the read data function. And then I'm going to come down here and add that in down here. Okay. And then inside here, I'm going to add a statement at the bottom that just says num people gets count. Okay. You may wonder why I don't just stick with one variable here. I could, instead of calling this count, I could call it num people, or instead of calling this num people, I could call it count. There's this splitting hairs a little bit, but in my opinion, it actually makes more sense to actually just have a variable named count that is keeping a running count of how many people there are. And then when you're done, assign it to the final variable that called num people.
Question.
Yes.
Won't you in line 49, won't you have to reference num people?
That is correct. Everyone okay with that? Everyone agree that that makes sense? Read data, if main was sending the information from main to read data, then this would be correct as is, right? But this information is flowing from the called function back up to the calling function. So I need an ampersand there. Or to put that another way, without the ampersand, when I change num people here, that's only changing the local variable named num people. It's not changing anything back out here in main. Okay, so that's why we need the ampersand. If that's not clear, I'm happy to talk about that some more, because that's definitely a key point that we need to make sure we get. And I'm not quite sure what to say about this other than just, you know, every time you write a parameter from now on, stop and think about, is this passed by value or is this passed by reference? I just, you know, I've noticed that, you know, this is like about the third or fourth time we have encountered this situation, and it doesn't seem like it's quite at the top of your priority list enough. I could be wrong about that. So let me just make this an encouragement to be thinking about that as you're writing your parameters. Okay, do we have everything we need now? I know I just did a ton of stuff, so if you need me to go over something again, just please let me know. If you need me to scroll up and down so you can see stuff, let me know. Let me update the prototypes here. Actually, not even update. I don't. Oh yeah, read data. I'm updating the read data prototype. Read person. So I need to also do print data. Oh, and then I haven't done the print person function yet. Okay, so any questions about everything? So we still have to write our print person function, but I think everything else is completely up to speed at this point. Oops, missing a semicolon. All right, let's work on print person. So this is going to be pretty straightforward. There's going to be some formatting stuff here with the set W function. I will talk about that in a sec. But at this point, I just want to get this down here. Not diet, filing status. So usually I kind of like the fact that I'm typing stuff in as we go. I don't have it like stored away in a file someplace and just copy and paste, because it tends to slow me down so that I can make sure that everyone's following. This is one of those times when I probably should have just copy pasted. You don't have to sit and watch me type, but I'm almost done. Okay, so just real quickly, I don't want to spend too much time on formatting stuff, but basically what this means is whatever the next value is that is going to get printed, print it in a field that is 15 wide. So, you know, even if the last name only has 6 letters in it, I'm still going to set aside 15 spaces for it, and the 6 letters are going to be right justified within that field. All right. If that's not totally clear at this point, not a huge deal. That is not the emphasis. It's covered in, I think it's chapter 3.8 in the textbook. Anyway, it's the chapter about formatting output. Yeah. No, 3.7, formatting output. In order to use set W, I need to pound sign include IO manip. And where did my right print person go? Okay, any other questions about print person?
Which section of the textbook has information about set W again?
It's 3.7.
Okay.
It's not something I cover in the lessons, so you'll have to go to the textbook for that. And you'll get to see what it does when I run this. Okay, there's one other thing I want to say about the parameter here, and this is something we're going to circle back around to. So if you don't completely understand this the first time around, it's okay. So you can think of this as a little bit of a sneak preview, but this is passed by value, which means that this variable print me inside this function is actually a separate copy of the variable that we had out here in print data, this variable here, a person list sub I. Okay, so it turns out that this is actually, if the parameter is a struct, this is pretty inefficient to use pass by value because, well, for one thing, it's using up more memory, right? Because I'm having to make a copy of that variable. But secondly, and actually more importantly, it's actually slowing my program down because of the time that it takes to make that copy. So whether or not that makes sense, what you should understand is that for whatever reason, with a struct, pass by value is inefficient. So we're not going to use pass by value. We're going to use pass by reference, but we're doing it for a different reason, right? We're using pass by reference not because we need the communication to be going from this function up to the function that called it. We're using pass by reference to make it more efficient. Now, the next step is, because we actually don't want to be able to change things inside this function, so as a matter of safe programming, and also as a matter of self-documenting code, right? So that right now, if a person reads this and they see the ampersand there, they're thinking, okay, this function might change the print me parameter. So what we're going to do to prevent that is we're going to put const in front, just like we did with arrays, right? We have the same problem with arrays. Arrays were always automatically passed by reference. So when we wanted it to behave like passed by value, we put a const in front. Okay. So anybody want to ask a question about that? Not super important that you get that this very first time. We'll be talking about that again. Probably not Wednesday, but probably next Monday. Okay, so let me go ahead and copy the prototype. I'm thinking that we may be good to go here. Let's give it a try. And one more time, why pass by? Yes, I will do that. Give me just a second. Let's give this a try. That looks like a bunch of garbage, but that actually is what was in the file. That was, I created this file using 50 actual famous people and then randomly generating strings for the rest of it. So that's why it looks so crazy, but I think you can see that there are some actual real people in here. So I think everything worked. Any questions about that part of it? Okay. All right, so I don't want to spend a ton of time on this, but just to go over this quickly one more time. Where to go? Right here. Why is it, so the question on the table is, why is it better to pass by reference when it's a struct? The answer, in one sense, the answer is, I could just say, because it's more efficient that way. And really, at this point anyway, that's all you need to know. To go one level deeper in the explanation, the reason that it's more efficient is that when you use pass by value, that means that you're actually creating a new copy of whatever that is that's being sent, right? So right here, I am calling print person, and I'm calling, let's say I'm calling it for the first time, so I'm sending person list sub 0. If I'm using pass by value here, what happens is I get a new famous person named print me in the computer's memory in a separate location from where person list sub 0 was. And so it's a copy of person list sub 0. If I use pass by reference, then instead of making a whole big, huge copy of that really big struct, I'm just sending the memory address of person list sub 0. And so I don't have to make the copy. So I save memory, but probably even more important than that, I save the processing time required to actually go through and create a copy of person list sub 0. Okay, I'm gonna leave it at that for now. Not sure if that'll make total sense. When we get to this next week, if it still doesn't make sense, maybe I can draw some pictures and that'll help. Okay, so I think I'm done talking about structs. Anybody want to ask a question? Anybody have any part of this program that they're not understanding? This program is available. It's not exactly the same, but 99.9% probably the same. If you go to lesson 14, I think I've even posted that already, unless I'm mistaken. Okay, so we have just a couple minutes left. So let me just at least give you sort of a introduction to our next topic. Basically, what we are doing next is we are talking about classes. Another way of saying that, the program isn't live yet. Okay, I will try to remember to do that. I thought for sure I had done that. As soon as we're done here. Feel free to remind me right before we end. So really what we're talking about here is we're starting to talk about object-oriented programming, which is the big topic. It's really sort of the central topic of this course. And everything we've been doing has been sort of gearing up for that. Sorry, just getting this set up for a new program now. So my approach to talking about object-oriented programming is, I'm going to go with the philosophy that for most students, it's easier to start with something concrete, understand it, and then talk about the abstract part of it, rather than giving you a bunch of definitions of abstract stuff first, and then showing you how to implement that. So as much as possible, I'm going to try to avoid some of the more abstract concepts as we get started. And I'm just going to start with object-oriented programming as talking about how to create a class in C++. And I'm going to talk about it as if the only use of a class is just that we are going to learn how to create a new type in C++. We already did that with structs, right? Structs is one way to create a new type in C++. But what we're going to be doing now is we're going to use a class for that instead of using a struct. And that just gives us a little bit more power than we had with structs. But just to get some words down here, some of the more abstract concepts that we need to eventually get around to: encapsulation, abstract, data type, the word itself, object-oriented programming. What does all of that mean? I feel like that should be uppercase for some reason. So that's what we're going to get to eventually. But just to keep things as concrete as I can, for now, we're just going to talk about how to create a new type in C++. So for our example that we're going to be working on, think about if we were at a software company and there was a project that's being worked on that involves a lot of processing with dates. So what I usually think of is maybe some sort of an accounting program where maybe you need to store dates of when payments were made, when bills are due, when people made a deposit into their savings account, so that you can figure out, how much interest they've earned, all that sort of thing. It's going to require a lot of dates, right? So someone in the company might assign a group of programmers the task of just creating a new type called date, so that whenever this project needs to store a date, instead of having to store 3 separate variables, month, day, and year, we can just store one variable of type date. And not only that, but this variable called date, or this class, sorry, I shouldn't say variable, this class or this type called date is not only going to be able to store all of the information required to store a date with just one variable instead of 3, it's also going to come with some more functionality. Like, for example, it might come with the functionality of being able to say how far apart 2 days are. Or it might come with a functionality of being able to compare 2 dates and see which one comes first, things like that. So we've got not only that we are grouping data the way we did with structs, but we're also going to provide some functionality that goes along with that data. That's the difference between how a struct is used in C++ typically and how a class is used in C++ typically. And that's really the definition of abstract data type. I said I wasn't going to go here, but bear with me for just a second. An abstract data type is basically when you group some data along with some ways of operating on that data into a self-contained and independent package. Okay. And so date is going to be our first example of an abstract data type. And in C++, the way that we implement abstract data types is with a class. I am aware that most, if not all of you, studied classes already in Python. But basically what I'm doing here is I'm starting from the ground up, assuming you've never seen a class before in your life. So hopefully that's not too repetitive. But I usually find that students could do with a little bit of a review on classes anyway. So hopefully this will be a good thing. Okay. Let me talk about the word object for a minute. I see that we are really close to being out of time. So I think what I'm going to do is just stop there. And then when we start on Wednesday, the first thing we will talk about is the word object that I was just about to talk about. All right, so as soon as I end the meeting, I'm going to go make sure that this lesson is all loaded. Anything else we need to talk about before we go? When I say this lesson, I mean the lesson on structs, which actually I don't have a lesson for it, but I do have this. I do have this program that you can access. Okay, is this an actual name? Okay, so if there are no further questions, I'm going to end the meeting and I will see you all on Wednesday.
Thank you.